Table this morning. My name is Justin Pelham, and I'm the Communications Specialist with Muskegon Lakeshore Chamber of Commerce. This morning, we have a great virtual roundtable with U.S. Congressman Bill Huizenga. Our sponsor for today is the Lakeshore Home Builders Association. We'll go over a few housekeeping rules. If we can keep your selves muted during the presentation, that way we don't have any interference. If you have a question during today's roundtable, down at the bottom, you can go to Manage Participants. Click on that and a sidebar will pop up. There you'll see an option to raise your hand. That gives me the indication that you have a question and I can call on you. You can also type it into the chat and then I can ask that question. So with that, I'll turn it over to U.S. Congressman Bill Huizenga. Bill, thanks for joining us this morning. Can you kind of tell us what you've been working on to support Muskegon in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, well, thanks, Justin. I appreciate the opportunity of being with everybody. While I can't see necessarily everybody, I think hopefully you've got a good, as good a view as we can as we're all doing our COVID casual meetings like this. So I do want to make a note to anybody asking questions and those kinds of things. It does appear that there's some media on the call, which is fine. I'm pretty open, and you're going to hear pretty much the same thing no matter what. But I just wanted to make sure for you all that are maybe participating and have a question or something. I just want to make sure you're measured in your comments, appropriate with my home builder friends, right? We measure twice and cut once, don't we, Justin?
That's right.
Well, and for those, and I'll get back to kind of the situation in Michigan, maybe with construction. You know, my family is in construction. I have a third generation sand and gravel operation. I've got a 24 unit condominium project that the family has been developing over the last number of years. So we've been directly affected as well in our businesses with what has been going on. And so many of you may know that we had what was commonly referred to as the phase 3.5 that we voted on last week in Washington, D.C. I drove out last week, Wednesday, in fact, I guess a week ago exactly today. We spent the day on Thursday dealing with sort of the preparations. There was a couple of votes that had happened, and with the main event being another package, a large package that had gone into mostly into the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. That was about $310 billion. 250 for the program as it's currently running, 60 billion set aside for institutions, credit unions, and banks under $50 billion. 30 billion of that was for institutions specifically between 10 and 50, and 30 billion of that was for $10 billion and less. And I know billions is a lot of money. $10 billion is a lot. But that frankly is a fairly small community bank, oftentimes, or certainly a regional bank. So that was an effort to make sure that there wasn't just this massive flood coming in from the national banks, who just by sheer volume were having a lot in. I should note that yesterday I spent a lot of my time on the phone and with texts with a number of folks, including the Michigan Bankers Association, who were very frustrated with the way that the system had not been able to handle the volume again. That is a real issue. I know they've been trying to build the supporting system around it, and much like our Michigan State unemployment insurance system here, these systems were never built for this kind of volume. And literally in the first 14 days of that PPP, they did as much loan volume through the SBA system, and it's a system called E-Tran that the banks have to take the application and then submit it through this E-Tran system. They did more loan processing in 14 days than the SBA had done in the entire previous 14 years. of lending. We have been hearing back from a number of small companies about that affecting them. Everything from literally the bagel shop to some smaller manufacturers. I've been in contact with a number of folks in Muskegon over the last number of weeks about the program, how it's working, how it's not fitting necessarily all of their needs. And again, the idea was not to have two systems moving forward with a unemployment system and this Paycheck Protection Act. The idea was to retain people on a payroll so that you weren't going to have this lag of trying to pull them back off of the unemployment system. And there's been some real issues with employers trying to get those employees back off of unemployment. The federal government in the original Phase 3 bill had included a $600 per week kicker into the unemployment system. That means that you'd have to basically pay about $24 an hour to match that. That was a significant barrier in many people's minds about how to pull people back. I do know and have suggested that a number of companies offer what I dub a Patriot bonus. The Patriot bonus is saying, look, you're on the front lines. You're part of the critical infrastructure of what society needs, whether it's a manufacturing or whether it's frankly grocery delivery and grocery shopping. Stocking, food processing. There's been a number of companies that have done that. I'm introducing and actually introduced yesterday, I think it was. It's either yesterday or today. Excuse me. A bill that I call the Patriot bonus, which says if you as an employer are offering a bonus to your employees. Some people do it in a lump sum. Some people do it on a weekly basis. Some people do it on an hourly basis. I know there's large companies like Meijer that are offering a $2 an hour bonus on that. There's some others that are saying we're giving $100 a week additional into people's paychecks. Well, I want to help share that burden and have the federal government give you then as an employer a tax credit for half of that. So if it's a $2 an hour increase in wages, it would cost you directly $1. If it's $100 a week bonus, it would cost you directly $50. I want to have some of that skin in the game. I don't think having just another national plan, program, fund set up and administered by bureaucrats that then have to make a decision about a application coming in and who qualifies and not qualify. I mean, that's sort of been the suggestion out of Chuck Schumer and others is to have some sort of hazard pay fund. I would much rather have the private sector determine that. And I got asked, Newsweek actually interviewed me about this and my HEROES Act legislation. And they were saying, okay, well, playing devil's advocate, what about those companies that don't want to offer a bonus? And I said, well, in this environment, as fluid as it is, employees are going to know who's offering those bonuses and who's not, and they're going to leave. They're going to go to those companies. And again, that's market pressure that is going to help encourage that. But I hear from so many employers that they're looking for a way to help create an atmosphere that is encouraging those people back to work. And we need that as we go back into a low risk restart of our economy. We're definitely going to need that. So maybe one last quick thing. We have had a number of conversations with those in healthcare, both the hospitals, the clinics, the practitioners. Yesterday, I was on a call with the College of Emergency Physicians. They pulled a number of their local folks to give some insight as to what's going on. I've been talking to nurse practitioners. I've been talking to police, fire folks really on the front lines. There is additional dollars that went into hospitals and testing, $75 billion of that in this 3.5 phase 3.5 bill just from last week. There was another $75 billion for hospitals. That's on top of the $100 billion that they had received previously. There's also $25 billion for the testing, and trying to make sure that is getting set up. Some of that is testing development, but there's also $11 billion of that distributed to states, localities, tribes, excuse me, others that are looking at emergency preparedness and trying to help cover some of those costs. So one last thing maybe out of that would be is the HEROES Act. It's a bill that I had introduced on April 3. We had this concept maybe a month ago, a little longer than that ago, where what we're trying to do is reward those frontline medical and healthcare workers. It's modeled on what we do with our men and women in uniform. When a young man or woman goes into a combat situation, the federal government suspends their federal income tax being withdrawn from their check. They get to keep that. It's a little bit of a bonus. I want to do the same thing for our firemen and police officers and healthcare workers on the front line, like ambulance drivers and EMTs, and not just those like nurses and doctors at the hospital. I also want to reward those that are in there cleaning the rooms, they're cleaning the equipment. They're the ones that are really as much of a danger as anybody else. And we also included that for nursing homes and senior centers and that kind of thing. That those that are in close quarters with very vulnerable populations, obviously. So that would be a suspension for 4 months of that income tax. It's capped over that time, so that it basically, if you make over $150,000 as a doctor or something like that, it's capped as to what you could take out. And look, not everybody is a wealthy emergency room doctor. There's plenty of family practitioners that have literally had their practices turned upside down. Their support staff. I'm talking to them. I know a number of them. There's obviously everybody has been making a sacrifice, and so I think those two things I'm trying to help spur along that safe and low risk relaunch of our economy as much as we can, trying to incentivize it and trying to say thank you and that we appreciate those that are on the front line. So not sure exactly how we did on the time there, but why don't we, I'm good with opening it up for questions if you want to do that. And I'm assuming is having coffee and tea as well. So it's a casual morning of having tea while we have our roundtable.
All right, thank you, Congressman Huizenga. We really appreciate it. We'll open it up for questions. You can either type your question into the chat bar and I will ask that question, or you can go to the bottom where it says Manage Participants. A sidebar will open up and you can raise your hand to signal that you have a question. I will call on you and then you can ask your question. So let's see if anybody has a question right now. We'll start with Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
Good morning, Bill. I know one of the things that you have preached about to us in Muskegon for seems like decades is fiscal responsibility. Where is all this money coming from?
Well, Dave, I think you know the answer. You're a good former reporter and investigate very, very well. I mean, there is no doubt that this is a debt situation. And here's what I would say. Unlike a lot of the other previous situations that have brought on massive amounts of significant amounts of debt, really do view this as like a takings issue with the state and the federal government, literally telling business, you need to stop. You cannot do what you are doing. This is very, very different than the '08 downturn, which was based off of a house of cards that was built on malfeasance and illegal activity that then caused banking collapses and a number of other things, and obviously housing collapses. This is the first time that we've ever had a situation where government has stepped in and said to literally virtually almost the entire economy, you need to stop. You can't do business the way that you are doing. So I do believe that we have a responsibility, and frankly, if you've got the authority and the ability to shut down an economy, I think you've got the moral responsibility to minimize the damage, first of all, and secondly, make sure that you restore it to the health as close as possible that you can. I will tell you that I'm on a text chain of about 20 members that this has been a very active conversation about what we are going to be doing about the debt. There is another working group that has been working with some of the outside groups in an attempt to make it a bipartisan group to say, look, we have got to have this as part of the conversation moving forward. You know, we did what we had to do on this immediate situation, but we also have that responsibility to everyone, including our kids and our grandkids, to help figure out what we are going to do to deal with that. And we have talked about this in the past. I was one of the founding members of something called the Balanced Budget Amendment Caucus. It was a bipartisan caucus that had gotten together in 2011 after I was elected, and this group, we pushed forward with a vote on a balanced budget amendment. Unfortunately, it couldn't get 2/3 of the necessary votes in the House. It did pass, but it didn't pass by 2/3. It's what our friends in Lansing have to deal with. I spent 6 years in the state legislature. Some of those toughest votes that you ever had to take were something called a reverse appropriation, where you had to go in and say to Pickett, MDOT, Department of Ed, prisons, you name it, sorry, we told you we were going to give you this money. We don't have the revenues coming in. We have to pull this money back. So we're going to have to deal with this, and it's a very, very legitimate question.
All right, thank you for that. Our next question is from Scott. Scott, would you like to ask that, please?
Sure. Good morning, Congressman Huizenga. Thanks for coming here.
Yeah.
My question is, do you think this is part of the PPP? The first round, a lot of large corporations got a ton of money. They're finally giving it back, or they had decided not to receive it, like the LA Lakers, Ruth's Chris, Steak Shack, 20 million, 10 million, 446 million, goes on and on. So do you think now for the second round of PPP, this is going to help the small businesses? And then I know a lot, we've seen like minority-owned small businesses too. They really need the help. So do you think this is going to really be supportive for these other small businesses who really need the money?
Yeah, you highlighted a couple of those. You know, the LA Lakers getting, I think it was 4.7 million when they are
right.
$4 billion.
Right. Yeah.
You know, they did not need that. Neither did Harvard with a $120 billion endowment or some crazy number. You know, they're really getting shamed into it. Now, what had happened is yesterday, Secretary Mnuchin announced some guidance on that that said, first of all, clarifying that publicly traded companies were not the intended target, and the way some of those initial rules were written, you could have some of those larger corporations that are publicly traded that had less than 500 people here in the U.S. that qualified. There are some exceptions, and there are some, I think, appropriate situations where smaller publicly traded companies that are more in like the manufacturing space. These are not high volume stock traders. You know, these are typically in the Nasdaq, and they're hovering around a couple of bucks. They fall below that, they're kicked off of the exchange. So there may be certain circumstances that it might be appropriate for that, but very limited. More broadly, Secretary Mnuchin announced that any loan over $2 million is going to be audited. And in the original language that was passed, there is a requirement for you to self-certify that you have been significantly impacted by the COVID situation. Now, in all fairness, not everybody knew what that situation was going to look like 2 weeks into it, and 3 weeks ago when this passed, right? You know, they were trying to get their arms around what economic impact is looking like. Even if you get the loan, it does not automatically mean that it is going to be forgiven. And there really is this test, the necessity test. Do you need to have this money to be able to survive and to function significantly? So I'm hearing it. There's a lot of even privately held companies that may not even be at that $2 million mark that are sort of re-examining whether they really need to have this loan. I'm not going to pick on any particular industry or anything, but we know that there are some particular industries that are actually quite busy right now. They aren't in that same cash crunch as the construction company or as in the small retailer that literally has been told you cannot opt. So there is certainly an understanding of that and an attempt both by SBA, Treasury, and those of us that are in those daily conversations to try to rectify that. That was, I should point out, as you said, it's sometimes it's just a volume percentage, you know, whether it's Bank of America or another large national bank, just the capacity that they have was so, you know, their bandwidth was so big. That was one of the reasons why Secretary Mnuchin and a lot of us kind of pushed for trying to ban this, meaning you're going to have a certain set aside for those banks, $10 to $50 billion. You're going to have another $30 billion pool available to only those financial institutions under $10 billion, you know, trying to make sure that it was more equitably spread around, because a lot of those small retailers probably aren't a customer of a big national bank, and they certainly may not have a loan with them, may have a checking account or something, business account, but they may not have a loan history. And that I think understanding is what was driving some of the language in this last phase.
All right, thank you for that. Now we'll move on to a question from Steve Olson. Steve, I just unmuted you.
Hey, Steve.
Steve, you there?
I know Steve's kind of shy, so I think I actually almost heard him laugh through the phone.
Okay. Let's see who we can move on to. I was texted a question that says, are nonprofits such as the YMCA mentioned in any relief packages?
Not specifically, but they're not excluded either. As long as they are a 501c3, there is the ability to go and access the PPP loans. There is, in fact, I think I'm going to be signing on to a letter that does call more specific attention to the nonprofit world, and as you all know, it's quite varied. You know, you've got larger organizations that have then chapters, like a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club. You've got small, more organic, local kind of nonprofits. You've got community foundations, a number of those that are very concerned about giving and what that's going to look like. There was an increase in some of the giving levels to try to help make sure that nonprofits were still a part of the decision-making process for donors. At this point, there isn't, to the best of my understanding, a specific set aside for nonprofits, but as long as they're a 501c3, they're able to function with that.
All right, thank you for that. Our next one, I don't have his name, gentleman with 9578. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thanks, Bill, for introducing the bills for the police officers and the firefighters. They definitely deserve it. But is the government printing any more money? That where something coming from?
The government's doing nothing but printing money at this point. That's the unfortunate side of this. You know, we're gonna see tax revenues decline because of income tax and a number of other things. Certainly, national gas tax that is affecting both the states and the federal government. Things like that they're going to have a pretty dramatic impact. And kind of going back to Dave's question a little earlier, what are we going to do to be serious about addressing that? We have to, and in short order. And that needs to, I think, as we have literally gone and spent almost at this point estimated $3 trillion, or allocated almost $3 trillion, which, by the way, is about 3 times the amount that I would vote on in a given year to spend, because so much of the federal government is on sort of autopilot for its spending in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, a number of those other programs like that. What we as members of Congress vote on is a little over $1 trillion. We're now approaching 3 times that in these aid packages. And again, I think it's appropriate for the time and place that we are at right now. We are going to have to figure out as a country, a state, as local governments and local community health providers, how we are going to deal with another wave or another corona-like virus that comes. I don't know that this can't be an annual thing. You know, that we are shutting down the economy and throwing massive amounts of money at individuals and small businesses and trying to keep markets open and that kind of thing. So we're going to have to get smarter about how we're going to approach this.
All right, we're getting close to our time, so I'll just ask one more question. This one's from
question popped up down at the bottom. I couldn't quite read it, but
oh, okay, here it is. We'll go to Steve's question. Will there be a round 3 for the CARES Act? Many businesses are concerned they will be shut out from the current PPP dollars.
Well, Steve and others, it's something that we constantly monitor. Mitch McConnell has said at this point, and frankly, I would agree with him, with the amount of money that has been put into the queue. If it hasn't gone out the door, it's certainly been put on the doorstep here. We need to just let this settle out a little bit. That is a real issue, I think, as we are moving forward. So we're going to be monitoring that. We want to make sure that this period of time that there is going to be relief for those small businesses. If you haven't gotten your PPP loan, if you have given your application, I know that there is, and it's hard to preach patience, but I know that there's a big queue, and they should be going through. But I want to hear that feedback and that input too. So appreciate it.
All right. And with that, we're going to close down our virtual roundtable. I'd like to thank Congressman Bill Huizenga for joining us this morning and answering the questions that we have. For those of you that didn't get your questions answered, please feel free to reach out to Congressman Huizenga. I know he has staff that was on this call, so they can help you through that. Tomorrow morning, we're hosting our next virtual roundtable which is Positioning for Success in the New Normal, with Paula Kendra from Kendra Consulting and Jason Pisecki from Revel. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this morning roundtable, the Lakeshore Home Builders Association. And with that, I'd like to thank all of you for attending. If you have any more information or questions, reach out to the chamber, visit our website at muskegon.org. We have a resource page. So with that, have a great rest of your morning. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate being with you.